Alrighty, Fish Unfiltered episode 65. We're back. Winter meetings have ended. Now, next big event would be pitchers and catchers reporting. Draft lottery also ended, so I'm here with Kevin Barral, your host, with Isaac Azout, my good friend and co-host, and we have Alex Krutchik coming back from Dallas, I believe not even 24 hours ago. Uh, Isaac, first of all, what's up? It's been a while. Excited to be back. We have a lot to talk about, nonetheless. Jake Burger's traded. Marlins had added a catcher to the roster, and the draft lottery, which couldn't have gone any worse.
Yeah, no, it's been an exciting. Well, I don't know if exciting is the right word, but it's been a tumultuous 72 hours. I'm sure Krutchik can agree with that. A lot happened across all of Major League Baseball during the winter meetings, which I was glad to see because I feel like over the last few years or a few off seasons, the winter meetings have been relatively quiet, and that was the furthest from that case this winter. Highlighted, of course, by the Jake Burger trade. Of course, Juan Soto signing, Garrett Crochet getting traded, and a whole lot more. So I am glad to see that this was the climax of the offseason yet again, because I think it's important for the game of baseball where some of the bigger moves happen during the winter meetings. And yeah, I'm excited to touch on it all.
Yeah, definitely. It felt like for a while, winter meetings had actually been pretty boring. I mean, I remember last season you were there.
Yeah.
Nothing happened. I mean, these, like Blake Snell didn't sign till like right before the season started. So, Krutchik, you got yourself a pretty good winter meetings, I would say. Just talk about the experience, and then, the last day or midnight, Jake Burger gets traded to the Texas Rangers. Very surprising. Nobody saw that coming. Absolutely nobody. Although it was mentioned on Christina De Nicole's article not too long ago. Jake Burger traded for 3 prospects: Echedry Vargas, Max Acosta, and Brian Mendoza. 2 infielders, 1 pitcher. Burger under contract up until 2029. Does not go into arbitration until 2026.
Yeah, Kevin. So that was Tuesday night. I spent that entire day writing or rather covering the draft lottery and the Marlins getting the 7th pick in the 2025 draft. And then I spent a lot of time trying to figure out around the hotel, trying to talk to people and figure out if the Jesús Luzardo trade rumors were legit. And then I get blindsided by a trade that I didn't see coming at all. I don't think you guys saw coming at all. The Jake Burger news. The Jake Burger news hit at like 11:30 local time in Dallas. At that point, all of my stories had been done for the day. All of my research and due diligence for Jesús Luzardo and a couple of other things were finished. I had turned the lights off in my hotel room. My phone was on my nightstand. My alarms were set for the next morning, and all of a sudden my phone blows up, and I see Jake Burger traded to the Texas Rangers, really out of left field. It took me by surprise. I know it was in Christina's newsletter, but it was still one of those things where there was just no indication of them doing such a thing because, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, but he was not even eligible for arbitration until next season. He was going to make $800,000 this season, and he wasn't due for a contract extension until 2029. He wasn't going to be a free agent until 2029. So I just did not see this coming.
Yeah, I mean, Isaac, well, just talk about the trade, but even more just the optics kind of it. You're trading a guy who, I mean, kind of is the fan favorite. He was the fan favorite. Everyone loved him. Great promotional guy with Burger King. We saw it this whole season. And it's a guy who, like Krutchik said, he was making, I think it's 760, 800K. Like, he's not making a lot. And he just missed the Super 2 deadline, which, it's pretty good for the Marlins in that case.
Right.
You can trade him next season. Now, we have to look at it on the other side of things, where this is a guy who you don't know if he would have hit 30 home runs again for another season or would have had the season that he did have. He had an OBP under 300, didn't hit very much for contact, and he did struggle a lot during the season. So you really didn't know what Jake Burger you were going to get, but the one big offensive piece you did have now gone, and I don't even know who they're going to rely off of next season. But just talk about that because I know you said you have a lot to say.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about with this trade. Just the whole return. Obviously, that's one part of the trade, the baseball trade. Then the whole optics that you said about trading away your most marketable player, the most popular player that you were able to acquire in 2023, and he just goes off. He didn't probably have the same success that he did have in 2023 with the Marlins, But still, that second half that he almost reached 30 home runs again after a really, really slow start to the season. And I think, it was a pretty safe bet that he was going to hit another 30 home runs next year, albeit with a high 200 on base percentage. And that's not to say that he's not, a flawed player. He is. If he weren't, he would be making more than $800,000 this year. However, for this team, a team that I think Jesus Sanchez is going to lead in home runs now. I think he's just so valuable to not only just on the field, because he's the type of guy that you want in that clubhouse, whether you're going to the postseason like we saw in 23 or you're losing 100 games like you saw last year. That is someone that you really would like to keep around when things are tough and things are great. So that's the argument that I had against doing this now, because we don't think that 2024 or 2025, is going to be much better than it was last year. This trade definitely confirms that. And so even before that, I thought that was someone that you would really like to not necessarily build around, but a solid player that it would really benefit the Marlins to have. Not to mention the marketability. They had $5 burger night, for Pete's sake, and that whole thing is just going to go away, unfortunately. And I think Berger was like the one name that even my friends that aren't baseball fans, they knew about Jake Berger. I don't think they know about anyone else, unfortunately. No disrespect to Sandy or any of the other players on this team or the pitchers that are pretty popular. It's different when you're an everyday player, and Jake Berger was that. And it was a tough pill to swallow because he really did treat the media extremely well. He was a pro's pro, and it was a tough one. And then after that, of course, we'll get into the return in a little bit. But I was pretty surprised at the timing. Do you risk it and wait till the deadline when a team gets a little bit desperate in July of 2025? Maybe he has an awful first half like he had last year. I don't know. But from what I've read and what I've seen, I think they did okay in this trade with the 3 prospects that we'll get into. But nevertheless, there's going to be a gaping hole in that lineup for the next couple of years.
And with Berger, the Marlins were 27th in home runs, and they were 26th in OPS. So their offense was already, no offense, putrid, to say the least, and it got even worse. Let's talk about the return. 3 prospects: Echirri Vargas, Max Acosta, and Brian Mendoza. Acosta was a guy who was signed a pretty long time ago, missed the first 2 years of his career, and had a very nice 2024 season at the AA level. I would assume he goes to AAA to begin the year. Vargas is just 19 years old, still a long way to go. We'll see what happens with him, but to many, he's actually considered the main piece in this deal, but I would kind of disagree with that. I would think it's Acosta, and I think we were talking about that, when this trade went down. And finally, Brian Mendoza, I think also he's only 20 years old. He's repeated a couple levels a couple times, but he started very nice 2024 season at the high A level. So Isaac, just talk about these guys. I know you're pretty high on Acosta. We added him to our top 30. Actually, we added Acosta and Vargas to the top 30. Mendoza kind of just off of the top 30. Maybe once we see a little bit more, we see where he maybe starts, in 2025, we could maybe add him on there.
The theme with these players seems to be that they're all trending in the right direction at this point. You mentioned Acosta. He was international free. I think he was like 22nd according to MLB Pipeline among international free agents in 2019. That was the same year as Jason Dominguez was an international free agent, just so fans have a time frame on that. And he missed the entire 2020 season because of COVID. He missed almost the entire 2021 season because of a gruesome ankle injury. And he's a very young kid that now in 2024, he played the entire AA season as a 21-year-old. And he really performed well, especially in the second half of the minor league season from July 1st on. In 240 plate appearances, he crushed the ball, slashing 310, 371, 474. So he, along with Echirri Vargas, it's going to take me a while to pronounce that name correctly, but same thing with him. The second half of his season, he performed extremely well with 800 OPS as well. And same thing with Mendoza. They all really had strong finishes to the season. Mendoza's ended with a promotion to high A. I'm a little bit higher on Acosta. The consensus I see is that he's a little bit more of a limited ceiling than Vargas. Vargas a little bit more risk, but all 3 have immense risk. All 3 have immense upside as well. Probably Vargas the most upside from what I've seen, but I'm very excited because I believe that all 3 will be in Major League camp this year. So the Grapefruit League schedule just got a lot more interesting for sure.
You think someone like Vargas at 19 and Mendoza would be there?
I don't know about possibly. I know obviously
Acosta's the only one that kind of makes sense to me.
He's on the 40-man, so he has to be maybe
Oh yeah,
Vargas. But we'll see about the other two.
They,
But
they would also have Cerna there, so it would be interesting if
right,
you
yeah,
want to
no,
get them playing time. They're not really gonna, so. So let's talk about kind of what the trade also means, because now the Marlins find themselves in a situation where this was already going to be one of the youngest teams in baseball. Now I want to say it's the youngest and pretty close to maybe second youngest. I think the oldest player is Jonah Bride, which is 29, or Anthony Bender, who's going to be 30. There's no player over 30 years old. Krutchik, I know you guys spoke to Peter Bendix, and I'm surprised by the response he gave, to be honest, where he kind of said that, signing a veteran player is actually something they're going to look into. I think more or less what he said. So talk about that. I know there's some options. They do need a first baseman, to be honest with you. I mean, unless Davis and De Los Santos absolutely kills it in spring training, but I don't think they would put him on the opening day roster. Same with an Agustin Ramirez. So just talk about, the potential of bringing in a veteran presence, which they're going to need regardless.
Yeah. Anthony Rizzo and Carlos Santana are out there just waiting to be picked up. But
he had a nice year too. He was a Gold Glover.
Wait, who?
Santana. He was a Gold Glover.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's gonna have to kind of look like the end of the Loria days, where it felt like every year there was a new random veteran that used to be really, really good, who's now in the twilight years of his career, that just needs one more contract before he retires. I think Anthony Rizzo could be a good one. I think Santana can be a good one. I certainly hope that they try to add veteran presence, because I know it's different sports, but part of why certain teams like in the NBA and the NFL struggle to get themselves out of the youth movement and into success is because there's no veteran presence. It's all just a group of high draft picks that don't have a whole lot of player leadership. So even though the guys around there are good, I do think there's talent coming up. You do need a guy who's going to tell you how the league works and how just being in the major leagues works, both on the field and off the field. So I certainly do hope that Bendix stays true to his word and brings in a veteran. There are veterans out there. There are guys out there that are looking for contracts. There's guys, especially at that position. So it won't be hard to find. We just got to see if he will spend the money for it.
Yeah, and I don't know if there are obviously a lot of veterans out there, but I'm not sure they're going to be targeting the Santanas and the Rizzos, because if they wanted to get a first baseman like that, they would have just kept Berger. And I feel like they do feel comfortable with giving Jonah Bride and Davis and De Los Santos a lot of time at first. They are very adamant about Connor Norby at third. DH is a little bit of an open spot, so you're right. There maybe is a room for a Carlos Santana, but you'd hope that with a young team like this, like you said, entire team in their 20s, that maybe a veteran coaching staff could, sort of lead the way. But no, they don't have a veteran coaching staff at all. It's a first-year manager. It's a first-year bench coach, first-year pitching coach. Well, he was an assistant pitching coach, but first time he's going to have the whole staff to himself. So he's going to have it's going to be a very young, inexperienced team in 2025.
It certainly is. So, all right, let's talk about the Rule 5. Marlins, I think to our surprise, kind of shocked us a little bit with their selection.
Miami Marlins select Liam Hicks, Hicks, catcher, Detroit Tigers, AAA roster.
Miami Marlins select Liam Hicks, a catcher from the Tigers AAA roster.
So the day prior, they'd released Mike Baumann, which kind of led us to thinking, all right, they're going to take a pitcher. Usually you do take a pitcher in the Rule 5 because hitters are pretty hit or miss. You really never know what could happen. But if you go with Liam Hicks, a guy who is an on-base machine, definitely a different type of catcher than what the Marlins have had in years past. So Hicks is a offensive first guy, a little struggles on the defense, plays a little bit of first. But Isaac, this is a guy that could potentially see himself even playing some first base depending on how the opening day roster ends up looking. Because, I mean, right now, your only first base is Jonah Bride, and they don't have anyone else from what I can recall, unless, again, De Los Santos, or Ramirez really stand out. But Hicks, a guy who will probably be the backup catcher, play a little bit of first base, DH from time to time. Certainly a guy who stands out, and we thought he was going to go to the Rays, ended up staying with the Marlins. So he now has to try to make the opening day roster. And for those who aren't aware, Rule 5, if you make a selection in the major league portion, this player needs to be on your 26-man roster from start to finish. You cannot send him down until after the season is over, unless obviously he's injured, and then you can put him on the IL.
Right. Yeah, like you mentioned, a lot of teams do tend to go pitchers because it's sort of easier to hide those players, in the back end of the bullpen and use them in mop-up roles. But with a hitter, we sort of this isn't exactly like a Nessie Nunez selection that the Nationals made, because he just wasn't major league ready offensively at all. He did not play whatsoever. Liam Hicks is a little bit closer to major league ready. He's going to have to skip the entire AAA level if and when he does make the Marlins major league team. And I don't know about first base, but I do see him getting a substantial amount of time at DH if they don't go out and sign a veteran like that, which, it's probably 50-50 shot. So I do see him getting a good amount of time at designated hitter, because in 2024, more than half his games were played at DH. He did not catch a large amount. So I would think that they might still be looking for a backup catcher to complement Fortes, because I'm not sure if he's the prototypical backup catcher type. Usually you want someone that's really good defensively, and he's sort of the opposite of that, maybe like a Rob Brantley type, a little bit of a hit tool first. But yeah, it's gonna be very interesting to see how this whole roster shakes out. Maybe a 3-catcher situation that I haven't seen in a long time with this team. But yeah, no, just to go over his stats really quickly, he had a pretty solid season across with Texas and Detroit. He was in the Carson Kelly trade, and he slashed 264, 379, 357 in 113 games. Like I mentioned, only 59 of which came at catcher. He did perform very well in the AFL last year, as our good friend Fish on the Farm wrote about on our website. I think it was this morning. He went 449, 553, 522 in 18 AFL games. Obviously, a very hitter-friendly environment in the Arizona Fall League, but still a pretty impressive bat. The slugging went down a little bit in 2024, but still, I think this is a no-brainer to pick him in a Rule 5. You don't lose anything, and if he shows up to spring training and he doesn't look the part, you just return him back, and it's that simple. So I was very much in favor of this one.
Krutchik, talk a little bit about what Frank Pilleri said. And I think you guys also spoke to Hector Crespo, said about this guy, Liam Hicks, and what he could provide. Because and also it's worth noting there's 3 catchers now in the 40 man. So it's Johnny Pereda, Nick Fortes, and Liam Hicks. So there would be some sort of quote unquote competition going on there, unfortunately, with Pereda and Hicks and Ramirez. There's 4 catchers on the 40 man.
There's 4 catchers on the 40 man. You could also make the argument that there's
2,
1 catcher and 3 first basemen. But yes, jokes aside, I do get the idea that as it stands right now, just to be clear, no one that I spoke to would give me confirmation on what the depth chart is going to be going into spring. So I don't want anyone to speculate, but just based on certain things that I heard, it definitely sounds like Hicks would be the tentative second guy, and Pereda would be the odd man out.
Hopefully.
Yeah, and like you guys said, he's a bat first kind of guy. I would have to assume, and this part is just common sense. I do think that they're going to try him at catcher. I think that will be the original idea, that he will be a traditional backup catcher, because I don't think you waste a pick on the Rule 5 on a catcher unless you want him to play that position. There were other offensive guys that they could have taken instead. They brought him here to play catcher. And Hector Crespo, director of minor league operations for the Marlins, acknowledged that there's things that need to be addressed behind the plate, but he's still confident that they can get there. He's going to work under the director of catching, Max Garrett. He's going to be working with the major league catching coach as well. It's going to be a work in progress. I think the bat is ready, at least ready enough compared to what we've seen from the catching position offensively over the last couple years in Miami. Defensively, I'll be excited to see what he can do in spring training.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we're right before we wrap up. I think we could just touch on the draft lottery that occurred the other day. We kind of already went into depth on it on Fish on First Live, but just really quickly, Marlins land the 7th overall pick. They had the best odds. They were tied with the Rockies for the best odds, to clinch the number 1 overall pick in the draft. And they fell all the way to 7th. The worst case would have been falling to 8th. So Ethan Holiday, anyone else that you were thinking at the top, no longer will be a Marlin. Isaac, talk a little bit about how bad, not even bad, because at the end of the day, it's still a top 10 pick. It's not the worst thing, but this is even lower than the Jacob Berry selection, which is pretty bad. So, the Marlins still a lot of great number 7 overall picks. They were talking about it. I think Frank Thomas was mentioned, Clayton Kershaw, Prince Fielder. So there's a lot of guys. So yeah, not great still, but you're still in the top 10.
It's a very talented draft class. Like Frank Pierre said, he's not sweating. There's a lot of talent there that will be there at number 7. The Marlins have chosen 7th before. It was Braxton Garrett in 2016. But man, when you're tied for the best odds to secure the number 1 spot, you lose 100 games in 2024, and you come away with a measly 7th overall pick. It's got to just feel like a sword to the heart for this front office because, hey, this is the way they're going to have to do it. And here come not only that, your divisional rivals who have had 2 number 1 picks already get a 3rd one in the Washington Nationals, who have used them impeccably with Steven Strasburg and Bryce Harper. And like you mentioned, Kevin, Ethan Holiday is right there waiting on deck. So it was just a really tough night when we were all watching it together, preparing for Fish on First Live. And the lottery system was implemented for reasons like this, to not incentivize teams to tank for the number 1 pick. And unfortunately, I do think there's some tinkering that needs to be made because the Seattle Mariners won 85 games, and they're going to have a higher draft pick than the Marlins. So is that the whole point of this new rule change? I don't know, but it's definitely tough for Bendix and the Marlins front office because, boy, I think they had probably a 60%, 70% chance of getting a top 5 pick, and they finished top 7. It was surreal, honestly. I'll always remember the text that Krutchik was obviously there in person, and we get the text. He was like, "Oh no!" I was like, "Oh boy, I didn't want to see the Marlins cardboard that early." It was a tough one.
And beforehand, we were joking. We were saying, imagine if we get the 7th pick. Imagine if we got the 8th pick. Like, we were making fun of it. Just because we were so confident that they were going to get a top 5, top 3 pick. And here we are. But, I mean, at the end of the day, I think the point of this lottery is to incentivize, not tanking, not trying to lose games. You want a competitive product. And the Marlins, are kind of paying for trying to tank. And there's no true reward for tanking in baseball, and I think that's the best way to say it, even now with the draft lottery, which Marlins will have one more chance at it next year, and then after that, they really can't suck, And I think that's the best way to put it. But Krutchik, did you guys talk to Pilleri right after and Bendix, and if so, just what were their messages, and obviously your thoughts on this pretty bad night for the Marlins? And after that, they traded Berger too, by the way, which made it even worse.
Yeah, it was a real rough day. But we spoke to Pilleri, and he pretty much echoed what you guys just said, is that there's talent there. He said there's not a whole lot of separation at the top. There's a lot of good players there. And I know Ethan Holiday is really good, but with respect to him, he's not a Strasburg or a Trout kind of guy where he can't miss. And then after him, there's really not a whole lot of separation. I think there's a bunch of good players in the top 7, even in the top 10. My thought on it is if you've truly improved as a development team, you should have no problem turning the 7th best player in the country into a solid big leaguer. So I know it's not as sexy as having the 1st overall pick, but if they've really changed, it shouldn't be an issue.
I think what also made it tougher to swallow was the fact that Miami had the 3rd worst record in Major League Baseball, and one of the teams that had a worse record than them wasn't even eligible for the freaking draft lottery, and they still that's what makes it even worse. It's just, if there was an ever LOL Marlins moment, I think it had to have been that, because my goodness, that stunk. That stunk.
Like, think about like a Marlins day, think about it. First you get the 7th pick, and then you trade Jake Berger for 3 guys who knows what they're going to turn out to be. 2 of them 19-year-olds basically. With Ganos, you don't even have a ceiling yet. You don't know what the floor is going to be. So, Krutchik, anything else you have from the presser? And I know you guys had a breakfast with McCullough. From what you can tell us, I know a lot of that stuff could be off the record. talk about that experience as well, and anything that stood out. He mentioned Edward Cabrera, someone he was pretty excited to watch.
Yeah, he's excited about Edward Cabrera. He already knows the book on him. He knows that he's got tremendous stuff. He knows also that he's got control issues to work on. So he's on the same page as everyone already. And as good as Skip was and as good as Mel was, it might be good to have a new set of eyes on the guy. Like not to say that the new guys will be better or worse, but just different. Like sometimes you just need a fresh set of eyes to see something that needs to be changed. So maybe this will be the time that it happens. I'm trying to think what else. When we spoke to Bendix, he confirmed that Jesús Luzardo is healthy, perfectly healthy. He's going through a normal offseason right now. He thinks that Max Meyer is still a long-term starter. He used the term long-term. And going back to the lottery real quick, the Marlins had, what was it, a 23% chance of getting the first overall pick?
22.3, I think. Or
22 and change. The NBA lottery, which most people are fine with, gives you a 14% chance of getting the number one overall pick if you're the worst team in the league. Now, one thing that is cool that the NBA does, and I don't cover the NBA, obviously, so I might have some of the wrinkles off. I think if you have a certain record, like if you're bad enough, you are locked into a certain place. Like you may not get first, but you're guaranteed to get at least in the top three. I would like to see Major League Baseball do that. They already sort of do it because the Marlins couldn't have picked lower than 8. But maybe you can make it closer to like 5 or something. But what I'm trying to say is I like the lottery. I know it sucks for Marlins fans that this is what you come away with, but like the Marlins got their chance. They had a 23% chance of getting the first overall pick. They had an 85% chance of getting in the top 6. Like you can't get a whole lot better than that. Just sometimes the ping pong balls just don't fall your way.
Yeah. So I think we could wrap it up there. Nothing much coming up for the Marlins, honestly. FanFest, I think, is like in a couple months. That'll be a lot of new faces, at least on the staff side, and it'll be a lot of same players, new prospects. I'm assuming 40-man guys will be there. So De Los Santos, Ramirez, whoever cares to see those guys. But
yeah, and really quick, because I know Krutchik mentioned Luzardo being fully healthy. That is great to hear. Obviously, we heard rumblings about teams inquiring on the left-hander who has just been the subject of trade talks for the last 365 days or so since last offseason. It was a whole speculation of whether or not they should do it. They probably should have. But, it's easy. Hindsight is always 20/20. But it's going to be very interesting to see because obviously Luzardo's healthy. He's getting dealt at the July 30th trade deadline, without a doubt. Unfortunately, from what I understand, I don't think Sandy Alcantara is going to make it past the July 30th deadline if he looks good and healthy. I think they trade him too. So he mentioned Max Meyer, Peter Bendix did, about being a long-term starter. You trade those two guys. Braxton Garrett, I have not heard solid things about him being fully healthy right now. I have not heard good things, and I haven't heard bad things either, which might be a good thing. But the last thing I heard was that he was completely shut down as of right now. So I don't know if you can count on him to be fully ready for spring training. But if that's the case, and Sandy is coming back from Tommy John, he should be more than ready by the time spring training starts. He could have maybe pitched in October should the Marlins have been in the playoffs. But you're going to really count on Luzardo, Cabrera, and Weathers, and Max Meyer, and in the second half of next season. I'm not sure what the plan could be. Obviously, you have Snelling and Mazer and some guys that are knocking on the door.
At some point.
Yeah, but I would like to think that the Marlins learned their lesson from last offseason and not acquiring any veteran starting pitching. I would think they learn, and maybe that's where they get a veteran. I'm not sure if they're going to get a veteran position player. I just don't see it, but maybe they get at least a long man or a starting pitcher, because to count on a guy coming back from Tommy, or 3 guys, if 3 visitor rotation coming back from Tommy John surgery at some point in their career, I think you should have some sort of depth. And right now, the depth isn't where I'd like, especially when Yuri's not coming back till at least till I think June for Yuri Perez. So it's
probably.
I think it would behoove the Marlins to sort of take some flyers on some Johnny Cueto type deals. Maybe not as expensive as Johnny Cueto was, but I think they need to, because It's gonna be a rough go of things if shit hits the fan early in spring training at least.
And even then, you thought last year they had the depth because you bring in all these guys, all this pitching, and that's not even enough. You ended up having to have a guy like Valente Belloso come up from skip AAA, by the way, to make a start. So it was
Forgot about it.
And you lost some guys too to the waiver wire. You lost Roderick Munoz, who, despite giving up a million home runs, he was someone who was making a lot of starts, and they lost a couple other guys to the waiver wires. So I mean, I don't know. It definitely will be interesting to see. And as you mentioned, Isaac Mazur probably ready to go. Because that's a guy who was already at the major league level, just needed some tune-ups. Robbie Snelling, Monteverde, some other guys to note there. So yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see who they sign. I think it'll be minor league deals though. I don't see a world where Peter Bendix makes too much of a commitment to a 1-year major league deal unless you're pretty confident you could flip a name out there or something like that.
Yeah, that's why you get them for depth in the first half of the season, and if it goes well, guess what? You have a good trade asset to flip at the deadline. And I'm going to make a prediction right now. I think Adam Mazur makes the opening day roster. I see him in the roster on opening day when Pittsburgh comes to Miami. I think with a great spring training, he has to make the team because injuries are inevitable, and something's going to happen with all these guys coming back from significant injuries. All of them, whether it's Braxton, Luzardo, Sandy, even Meyer, they're all coming back from injury. Someone's going to get hurt again, and I think Mazur steps in and maybe is even in the opening day rotation.
All righty, and we'll end it off on that. Krutchik, is always thank you for joining us. Always a good time. So from Isaac, Krutchik, myself, Eli from behind the scenes, we'll see you guys probably in 2 weeks. I'm sure there'll be something to talk about. And as always, peace out and go fish.